All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are going deep. We're diving into the fascinating world of hormones. You know, those tiny chemical messengers that control pretty much everything in our bodies. It's like Hormones 101. And our guidebook for this journey is Dr. Rasha Eldeeb's Physiology handout. And to help us navigate this complex world, we have our expert in endocrinology with us. I'm so glad you're here to help us break it all down because hormones, let's face it, they can be a bit of a mystery.
They absolutely can, but they're also incredibly fascinating. Once you understand how they work, it's amazing to see how they orchestrate so many intricate processes in our bodies.
So the handout starts by talking about how our bodies are regulated.
hmm
And it mentions two key players, the nervous system and the endocrine system. Can you help us understand how these two systems work together?
You can think of the nervous system as the internet, sending rapid-fire signals through nerves to control things like muscle movement and reflexes. It's how you react quickly to a hot stove or swerve to avoid something in the road.
So it's all about those lightning-fast responses. What about the endocrine system?
Well, the endocrine system is more like a postal service, delivering messages through hormones that travel in the bloodstream. It's slower than the nervous system, but it has longer-lasting effects, regulating things like growth, metabolism, and reproduction.
I see. So it's like the difference between a text message and a letter. One is immediate, while the other takes a bit longer, but can convey a more detailed message.
Exactly. And these letters, the hormones, they come from ductless glands all over your body. These glands release hormones directly into the bloodstream, which acts like a highway, transporting them to specific organs or tissues called target organs.
So hormones aren't just randomly floating around. They have specific destinations.
Absolutely. It's very precise. Imagine each hormone as a key that can only fit a specific lock on a target cell.
That's a great analogy.
Wait.
But the handout also mentions something called autocrine and paracrine signaling. What are those?
Okay, so sometimes cells need to talk to themselves or their neighbors. Autocrine signaling is like a cell leaving itself a sticky note, sending a message to itself. Paracrine signaling is like passing a note to your coworker in the next cubicle. It's a localized message that affects nearby cells.
So these are different from endocrine signaling, where hormones travel through the bloodstream to reach distant targets.
Exactly. Endocrine signaling is like sending a mass email. It's how glands communicate with cells throughout the body.
This is making a lot more sense now. So we've got these different ways that hormones can communicate. But the handout also mentions that there are different types of hormones, right? It talks about steroids, peptides, and amines. Can we break those down a bit?
Of course. Let's start with steroids. Think of them as the heavy hitters. They're derived from cholesterol. And often they make big decisions that affect your entire body. They're involved in things like regulating your stress response with cortisol, controlling your blood sugar with aldosterone, and influencing sexual development and reproduction with hormones like testosterone and estrogen.
Wow, they sound pretty important. Where are these steroid hormones produced?
They're mainly produced in a few key locations. The adrenal glands, which sit on top of your kidneys, the gonads, which are your ovaries or testes, and the placenta during pregnancy.
So these steroids are the big players,
Hmm.
impacting a lot of crucial functions. What about peptides? What makes them different?
Peptides are more like the efficient messengers, delivering instructions to specific cells. They're made up of short chains of amino acids. And they're actually the most common type of hormone in the body. They tackle a diverse range of tasks.
Okay, so they're more specialized. Can you give us an example of what peptides do?
Absolutely. Think about insulin, the hormone that regulates blood sugar levels. Insulin is a peptide hormone that's produced by the pancreas. When you eat, insulin helps your cells absorb glucose from the bloodstream. It's how your cells get energy.
Makes sense. So steroids are like the big picture decision makers, and peptides are the task-oriented messengers carrying out those decisions.
Exactly. And then we have amines. They're kind of like the special forces of the hormone world. They're derived from the amino acid tyrosine, and they're involved in more rapid responses.
Special forces, I like that. Can you give us an example of an amine hormone in action?
Think about adrenaline. It's an amine hormone produced by the adrenal glands. And it kicks in when you're facing a stressful or dangerous situation, triggering that fight or flight response, increasing your heart rate, boosting your energy levels, and sharpening your focus so you can respond quickly to the threat.
So amines are the ones responsible for those quick bursts of energy and focus when we need them most. That's fascinating.
It is. It's like having your own internal superhero team ready to jump into action when needed.
Okay, so we've got these different types of hormones with specific roles,
Mm-hmm.
but how do they actually work? Once they reach their target cells, how do they communicate their message, and how do they get things done?
That's a great question, and that's where it gets really interesting. It all comes down to something called a hormone receptor complex.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this hormone receptor complex.
Each hormone is like a key, and it can only unlock a specific lock, which is the receptor, on or inside a cell. When a hormone binds to its receptor, it triggers a series of events inside the cell that ultimately lead to a specific response.
So it's not just a random encounter, it's like a lock and key mechanism.
Exactly. It's a highly specific interaction that ensures the right message is delivered to the right place at the right time.
So the hormone binds to its receptor. But then what happens? How does that actually change the way the cell functions?
Well, the location of the receptor actually makes a big difference. Some receptors are located on the surface of the cell, and others are found inside the cell, either in the cytoplasm or the nucleus.
Okay, so there are different locations for these receptors. What's the significance of that?
Well, the location of the receptor dictates how the hormone can actually interact with the cell and how it can trigger a response. For example, steroid hormones, those heavy lifters we talked about earlier, can actually pass right through the cell membrane and bind to receptors inside the cell.
So they have VIP access.
Exactly. They can bypass security and go straight to the control center, often directly influencing gene expression and altering the way the cell behaves.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. So they can go straight to the source and make big changes. What about the other types of hormones? Do they work the same way?
Not quite. Peptide and averamine hormones, those efficient messengers in special forces, can't pass through the cell membrane so easily. So they bind to receptors located on the cell surface, like ringing the doorbell and waiting for a response.
So they need to send their message through an intermediary.
Precisely. Once they bind to their receptor on the cell surface, they trigger a cascade of events inside the cell that lead to the desired action. It's like a chain reaction, with each step amplifying the signal.
It's incredible how complex and coordinated these processes are. It's like a well-choreographed dance happening at the molecular level.
It truly is, and it's happening all the time throughout your body, without you even realizing it.
This is blowing my mind. But it also brings up another question. If hormones are constantly circulating in our bloodstream, how does our body know when to release them and when to stop? I mean, wouldn't we be in a constant state of chaos if hormone levels were just fluctuating randomly?
That's a great question. It gets at the heart of how our bodies maintain balance. It's all thanks to a brilliant system of regulation.
Okay, tell me more about this regulation. How does our body keep these hormones in check?
There are two main ways that hormone secretion is regulated: neural mechanisms and feedback mechanisms. Neural mechanisms involve direct stimulation from the nervous system, like when you encounter a sudden threat. And your sympathetic nervous system tells your adrenal glands to release adrenaline.
So it's like a direct line from the brain to the glands, saying go, go, go.
Exactly. It's a rapid response system to help you cope with immediate challenges. But the more common and more complex way our bodies regulate hormone secretion is through feedback mechanisms. It's like a sophisticated thermostat, constantly monitoring hormone levels and adjusting output to maintain a stable internal environment.
This feedback mechanism sounds pretty important. How does it actually work?
Well, with feedback mechanisms, the effects of a hormone actually influence its own secretion. It's a self-regulating system that makes sure hormones stay within a healthy range.
Okay, I'm following you so far. But the handout mentions two types of feedback: negative feedback and positive feedback. What's the difference between the two?
Think of negative feedback as a balancing act. When a hormone's effect reaches a certain level, it signals back to the gland to reduce or stop further hormone release. It's like a thermostat that kicks in when the room reaches the desired temperature, preventing it from getting too hot or too cold. This negative feedback loop is the most common type. It ensures that things stay within a healthy range.
So it's like a self-correcting system. Can you give us an example of negative feedback in action?
Absolutely. The regulation of thyroid hormone is a great example. Thyroid hormone plays a crucial role in metabolism. When thyroid hormone levels rise, they signal back to the pituitary gland in the brain to reduce the release of thyroid-stimulating hormone, or TSH. And this, in turn, reduces the production of thyroid hormone, preventing levels from getting too high.
So it's like a checks and balances system, making sure things stay in equilibrium. What about positive feedback?
Positive feedback is a little less common, but it's equally fascinating. In this case, the hormone's effect actually increases its own release, leading to a rapid amplification of the response.
So instead of bringing things back to balance, it's like pushing things further in one direction.
Exactly. The release of oxytocin during labor is a classic example of positive feedback. As the uterus contracts, it signals the release of more oxytocin. which further intensifies the contractions, leading to the birth of the baby.
So positive feedback creates this powerful snowball effect, driving a process forward to completion. That's amazing. But tell me, who's in charge of coordinating all of this? I mean, it sounds like a pretty complex operation.
It is incredibly complex.
Yeah.
And the masterminds behind this whole operation are the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, located in the brain.
Ah, yes. The handout refers to them as the master control centers of the endocrine system. What makes them so important?
The hypothalamus is like the CEO, constantly monitoring your internal environment and sending out instructions based on what it senses. It gathers information about things like your body temperature, blood pressure, and nutrient levels. And then it sends out hormonal memos to the pituitary gland, which sits just below it.
So the hypothalamus is the strategist,
Yeah.
and the pituitary gland is the one carrying out the orders.
Exactly. The pituitary gland is like the executive team, receiving instructions from the hypothalamus, and then releasing specific hormones into the bloodstream to carry out those instructions.
This is incredible. It's like a perfectly coordinated command center, making sure our hormones are doing exactly what they need to do, when they need to do it. But how do the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland communicate with each other? I mean, they're right next to each other, but how are they actually sending those hormonal memos back and forth?
They're connected in two ways. Through a special network of blood vessels called the hypothalamic-hypophyseal portal circulation, and through a direct neural pathway called the hypothalamic-hypophyseal tract.
Okay, two different connections. Let's unpack those. What's the deal with the hypothalamic-hypophyseal portal circulation? That's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful, but it's basically a direct pipeline, allowing the hypothalamus to send releasing and inhibiting hormones to the anterior pituitary, which is the front part of the pituitary gland.
So it's like a dedicated messaging system, specifically for hormone communication between the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary.
Exactly. It's incredibly efficient and allows for precise control over the release of hormones from the anterior pituitary. For instance, the hypothalamus can release hormones like CRH, which stands for corticotropin-releasing hormone, to stimulate the anterior pituitary to release ACTH, which then signals the adrenal glands to produce cortisol.
Wow, that's a chain reaction. It's like a relay race, with each hormone passing the baton to the next.
Precisely. And then there are inhibiting hormones, like somatostatin, which, as the name suggests, inhibit the release of certain hormones from the anterior pituitary. It's all about maintaining that delicate balance we talked about earlier.
So the hypothalamic-hypophyseal portal circulation is all about hormonal communication between the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. What about the other connection, the hypothalamic-hypophyseal tract? What's its role?
The hypothalamic-hypophyseal tract is a direct neural pathway connecting the hypothalamus to the posterior pituitary, the back part of the pituitary gland.
Okay, so this connection involves nerves rather than blood vessels. What kind of communication happens through this pathway?
This pathway is responsible for the transport and release of two key hormones, oxytocin and vasopressin, also known as antidiuretic hormone or ADH. These hormones are actually synthesized in the hypothalamus and then transported down to the posterior pituitary for storage, and they're released upon stimulation.
So the posterior pituitary acts like a storage and release center for these hormones, which are actually produced in the hypothalamus.
Exactly. And these hormones are involved in some pretty important functions. We already talked about oxytocin's role in labor and childbirth, but it's also involved in social bonding, trust, and even feelings of love.
Wow. So oxytocin is like the cuddle hormone, promoting those warm and fuzzy feelings. What about vasopressin? What does it do?
Vasopressin, or ADH, plays a key role in regulating water balance in the body. It helps conserve water by reducing urine output, ensuring that your body stays properly hydrated.
So it's like your body's internal hydration monitor.
Exactly. And it's crucial for maintaining blood pressure and electrolyte balance.
This is incredible. We've covered so much ground already, and I feel like we're just scratching the surface of this vast and intricate endocrine world.
You're absolutely right. There's so much more to discover. But we've laid a solid foundation for understanding how these tiny chemical messengers play such a vital role in regulating our bodies.
And it's amazing to think about how the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, these two tiny structures in the brain, orchestrate this entire symphony of hormones, ensuring that everything runs smoothly. But I'm curious, the handout also mentions specific hormones secreted by the anterior pituitary gland. Can you tell us a bit more about those?
Absolutely. The anterior pituitary releases a variety of hormones, each with its own unique function. We can broadly categorize them into two groups: protein hormones and glycoprotein hormones.
Okay, two different categories. What are some examples of protein hormones released by the anterior pituitary?
Well, some key protein hormones include ACTH, which we've already touched upon, prolactin, growth hormone, beta-lipotropin, and gamma-MSH. These hormones play diverse roles in everything from regulating stress response and milk production to promoting growth and pigmentation.
It's quite a list. And what about the glycoprotein hormones? What are some examples of those?
The glycoprotein hormones include TSH, which stimulates the thyroid gland, LH, which stands for luteinizing hormone, and FSH, which stands for follicle-stimulating hormone. These hormones are primarily involved in regulating reproductive processes, controlling the production of sex hormones, and the development of eggs and sperm.
Wow, it's amazing to think about all these different hormones working together to keep our bodies functioning properly.
Yeah,
I'm already feeling a lot more knowledgeable about the endocrine system.
that's great to hear. It truly is a fascinating and complex system, but understanding the basics can help us appreciate just how incredible our bodies are.
So we've got these different types of hormones: steroids, peptides, and amines, each with their own kind of responsibilities. And we've talked about how the hypothalamus and pituitary gland act as these master control centers, coordinating the release of these hormones throughout the body. But I'm still kind of curious about those specific hormones released by the anterior pituitary gland. We started to touch on them before we...
Right, we were just starting to delve into those protein hormones
uh,
and the glycoprotein hormones that are released by the anterior pituitary.
exactly. Can we pick up where we left off and explore those in a bit more detail?
Absolutely. Let's start with the protein hormones. We already talked about ACTH, which stimulates the adrenal glands to produce cortisol. But there are other important protein hormones released by the anterior pituitary, including prolactin, growth hormone, beta-lipotropin, and gamma-MSH.
Okay, let's break those down. What's the deal with prolactin?
Prolactin is probably best known for its role in milk production after childbirth. It stimulates the mammary glands in the breasts to produce milk, making sure that newborns have the nourishment they need.
So it's essential for breastfeeding. Makes sense. But are there any other functions of prolactin?
Interestingly, prolactin actually has a wider range of functions beyond lactation. It's involved in reproductive health, immune function, and it even plays a role in regulating fluid balance. It wears many hats.
That's fascinating. It's amazing how one hormone can have so many different effects throughout the body.
Yeah.
What about growth hormone? I'm guessing it has something to do with, well, growth?
You guessed right. Growth hormone, like the name suggests, is essential for growth and development, especially during childhood and adolescence. It promotes the growth of bones, muscles, and other tissues.
So it's what helps us shoot up during those growth spurts.
Exactly. But growth hormone isn't just important for kids. It continues to play a role throughout adulthood, helping to regulate metabolism, body composition, and even bone density.
Interesting. So it's not just about getting taller. It's about maintaining overall health and well-being as we age. What about those other two protein hormones you mentioned, beta-lipotropin and gamma-MSH? What do they do?
Beta-lipotropin is actually a precursor hormone. It's broken down into smaller peptides, including endorphins, those are the feel-good hormones, that have pain-relieving and mood-boosting effects.
So it's like a factory for those happy hormones.
Wow.
That's pretty cool. And what about gamma-MSH?
Gamma-MSH, or melanocyte-stimulating hormone, is involved in pigmentation. It stimulates the production of melanin, the pigment that gives our skin its color.
So that's what influences our skin tone. Fascinating.
Okay.
So we've covered the protein hormones released by the anterior pituitary. What about those glycoprotein hormones? You mentioned TSH, LH, and FSH. Can we dive into those a bit?
Absolutely. TSH, or thyroid-stimulating hormone, is essential for regulating the thyroid gland. It stimulates the thyroid to produce thyroid hormones, which, as you know, play a crucial role in metabolism, growth, and development.
Right. We talked about thyroid hormone earlier when we were discussing negative feedback loops. It's amazing how everything's connected. What about LH and FSH? What roles do they play?
LH and FSH are often referred to as gonadotropins because they act on the gonads, which are the ovaries in females and the testes in males. They're essential for regulating reproductive processes.
Okay, so they're all about reproduction. Can you be a bit more specific about their individual functions?
Sure. LH, or luteinizing hormone, triggers ovulation in females, which is the release of an egg from the ovary. In males, LH stimulates the production of testosterone in the testes.
So LH is a key player in both male and female reproductive systems. What about FSH?
FSH, or follicle-stimulating hormone, also has distinct roles in males and females. In females, FSH stimulates the growth and development of follicles in the ovaries, which contain the developing eggs. And in males, FSH stimulates the production of sperm in the testes.
Wow. It's amazing how these hormones work together to orchestrate the entire reproductive process. It's like a complex dance, with each hormone playing its part at precisely the right time.
It truly is a remarkable system, and it highlights how important the endocrine system is for overall health and well-being.
Absolutely. Yeah. But we've been focusing a lot on the inner workings of the endocrine system. Can we maybe shift gears a bit and talk about how these hormones actually impact our daily lives? I mean, we know they're important, but how do they actually manifest in our day-to-day experiences?
That's a great question. It's important to remember that hormones aren't just abstract concepts. They have very real impacts on our thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and overall health.
So let's talk about some specific examples. What are some ways that hormones influence our daily lives?
Okay, let's start with something everyone can relate to. Stress. When you're faced with a stressful situation, your adrenal glands release cortisol, the stress hormone. Cortisol helps your body cope with the stressor by mobilizing energy stores, increasing alertness, and suppressing non-essential functions.
So it's like putting your body on high alert, ready
Yeah.
to deal with a challenge.
Exactly. In the short term, cortisol is really helpful. But if stress becomes chronic, cortisol levels can stay elevated, and that can have negative consequences for your health.
I've definitely heard about the dangers of chronic stress. What are some of the health issues that can arise from prolonged exposure to high cortisol levels?
Chronic stress and elevated cortisol can contribute to a whole range of problems, including weight gain, sleep disturbances, impaired immune function, increased risk of cardiovascular disease, and even mental health issues like anxiety and depression.
Wow. That's a pretty serious list. It really highlights the importance of managing stress and finding healthy coping mechanisms.
Absolutely. Stress management is crucial for overall well-being, and there are a lot of effective strategies for reducing stress, like exercise, mindfulness practices, spending time in nature, and connecting with loved ones.
Those are all great suggestions. I'm definitely going to try to incorporate those into my routine.
Okay.
So we've talked about cortisol and its role in stress response. What other hormones have a noticeable impact on our daily lives?
Let's talk about sleep. Melatonin, a hormone produced by the pineal gland in the brain, is essential for regulating our sleep-wake cycle.
Ah, yes. Melatonin. I've heard about that. It's often referred to as the sleep hormone, right?
Exactly. As daylight fades, melatonin levels start to rise, signaling to your body that it's time to wind down and prepare for sleep.
So it's like our body's natural sleep aid.
Yeah.
But I've also heard that our modern lifestyles can interfere with melatonin production. Is that true?
It is. Exposure to artificial light, especially from electronic devices, can suppress melatonin production and disrupt our sleep patterns.
That makes sense. I know I've definitely struggled with sleep after spending too much time on my phone or laptop at night.
It's a common problem, but there are things we can do to minimize the negative impacts of artificial light on our sleep. Creating a relaxing bedtime routine, dimming the lights in the evening, and avoiding screen time for at least an hour before bed can all help to promote healthy melatonin production and improve sleep quality.
Those are all great tips. I'm definitely going to try to incorporate those into my routine. Okay, so we've talked about stress and sleep. What other areas of our lives are significantly influenced by hormones?
We can't talk about hormones without talking about mood and emotions. Our brains are swimming in a complex cocktail of neurochemicals, many of which act as hormones, influencing our emotional states.
Okay, so hormones are at play behind the scenes, shaping our moods and emotions.
Absolutely. For instance, serotonin, a neurotransmitter that also acts as a hormone, plays a key role in regulating mood, appetite, and sleep. Low levels of serotonin have been linked to depression, anxiety, and even aggression.
I've definitely heard about serotonin and its importance for mental health. What about those feel-good hormones we mentioned earlier, the endorphins?
Endorphins are incredible. They are naturally produced opioids that have pain-relieving and mood-boosting effects. They're released in response to exercise, stress, pain, and even laughter.
So that's why we feel so good after a workout or a good laugh.
Exactly. Exercise is a fantastic way to boost endorphin levels and improve your mood. And laughter truly is the best medicine. It triggers a whole cascade of beneficial hormones, including endorphins.
I'm all for more laughter in my life. Okay, so we've covered stress, sleep, mood, and emotions. What other areas of our lives are significantly influenced by hormones?
Let's see. We can't forget about energy levels and metabolism. Thyroid hormones, which we've already touched upon, play a crucial role in regulating metabolism. which is the process by which your body converts food into energy.
So thyroid hormones are kind of like the thermostat for our metabolism.
That's a great analogy. When thyroid hormone levels are optimal, our metabolism hums along smoothly, providing us with the energy we need to function throughout the day. But when thyroid hormone levels are too high or too low, it can have a significant impact on our energy levels, weight, and overall health.
Right. I've heard about people struggling with thyroid issues, either having an overactive thyroid or an underactive thyroid. What are some of the symptoms of those conditions?
An overactive thyroid or hyperthyroidism can lead to symptoms like weight loss, rapid heartbeat, anxiety,
Yeah.
and difficulty sleeping. An underactive thyroid or hypothyroidism can cause fatigue, weight gain, constipation, and depression.
Wow. It sounds like thyroid hormone imbalances can really throw things off. It's amazing how much these tiny hormones impact our overall health.
It really is, and it highlights the importance of maintaining a healthy endocrine system.
Absolutely. This has been so insightful. I'm already thinking about my own lifestyle choices and how they might be impacting my hormone balance. But before we wrap up, I'm curious, are there any other surprising or unexpected ways that hormones impact our daily lives?
One area that's often overlooked is the role of hormones in social behavior and interactions. For instance, oxytocin, which we've already talked about in relation to childbirth and bonding, also plays a role in social cognition, trust, and even empathy.
So oxytocin isn't just about maternal instincts and romantic love. It's involved in our broader social interactions as well.
Exactly. Studies have shown that oxytocin can increase feelings of trust and generosity, and it may even play a role in reducing social anxiety.
That's incredible. So those warm and fuzzy feelings we get when we connect with others might be partly due to oxytocin.
That's right. It's a fascinating hormone that has far-reaching effects on our social lives.
This is blowing my mind. It seems like hormones are involved in almost every aspect of our existence.
They really are. And the more we learn about the endocrine system, the more we appreciate just how intricate and powerful these chemical messengers are.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into the world of hormones. I'm feeling a lot more knowledgeable about how these tiny messengers impact our bodies and our lives. But before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share about hormones? Or any final thoughts you'd like to leave our listener with?
You know, I think the biggest takeaway is that our endocrine system is a finely tuned and incredibly complex system that plays a vital role in regulating virtually every aspect of our being, from growth and development to mood and behavior. Hormones orchestrate the symphony of life, and by understanding how these hormones work and what factors can influence their balance, we can take proactive steps to support our overall health and well-being.
That's a great point. Knowledge is power. And understanding how our bodies work empowers us to make informed choices that can benefit our health.
Exactly. And when it comes to hormones, there's always more to learn. It's a fascinating field of study, and new discoveries are being made all the time.
This has been an absolutely amazing deep dive. I'm feeling so inspired to learn more about this incredible system that's working tirelessly behind the scenes to keep us functioning at our best.
It's been my pleasure to share this journey with you. I hope our listeners are feeling as inspired as you are.
You've given us such an amazing overview of the endocrine system and all the ways these powerful hormones impact our lives. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to add? Any final wisdom you'd like to share about hormones?
I think it's important to remember that. We've talked a lot about individual hormones, but the endocrine system, it's all interconnected. What affects one hormone can often affect others.
Right. It's like a delicate ecosystem, where everything needs to be in balance.
Exactly. And that balance can be influenced by so many things: genetics, lifestyle choices, environmental exposures, even our own thoughts and emotions. It's a really complex interplay of nature and nurture.
So it's not just about our genes. We have some control over how our endocrine system functions.
Absolutely. There are things we can do to support our hormonal health, like eating a balanced diet, getting enough exercise, managing stress, and getting enough sleep. Those can all make a difference.
Those are great reminders. It's good to know that we can take steps to optimize our hormonal balance.
And remember, everyone's endocrine system is different. What works for one person might not work for another. It's so important to listen to your body, be aware of any changes, and talk to a healthcare professional if you have concerns.
That's great advice. It's all about finding what works best for you and asking for help when you need it.
Exactly. And I'd also encourage our listener to stay curious. The field of endocrinology is constantly evolving with new discoveries all the time. There's always more to learn.
Well, you've definitely sparked my curiosity. I'm feeling inspired to learn more. about this incredible world of hormones. This has been a fantastic deep dive. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure. I hope it's been as insightful for our listeners.
I'm sure it has. We've covered so much. From the basics of how hormones work, to how these tiny messengers impact our health and well-being, and even our social lives.
It's amazing, isn't it? The power and complexity of the human body. We're learning more and more about how these systems work together.
And as you said, there's always more to discover. So, to our listeners, we encourage you to keep exploring this fascinating world of hormones. It's a journey of self-discovery that can really help you understand and take control of your own health and well-being.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. We hope you enjoyed it.
Until next time, keep those chemical messengers flowing